So a lot of people want to compare motivation and discipline as if they are two different things. A lot of people want to talk about discipline as if it is an alternative or opposite to motivation. And a lot of people talk about motivation as if it is something bad, right? Something we shouldn't rely on. Feeling motivated won't get you success, which is true. This is accurate. You won't become successful through motivation alone. But a lot of people want to say that motivation is almost a negative to discipline. Whereas the reality is that these two go hand in hand, right? Motivation and discipline go together. That's why I created this video called the Motivation Paradox, right? This video is all about the fact that motivation is actually driven by discipline, not the other way around. So discipline actually fuels and creates motivation. Motivation does not initiate discipline. All right, so motivation versus discipline, and more specifically, why these two actually go hand in hand. So motivation and discipline aren't actively working against each other, right? Feeling motivated towards doing something is not a detriment to discipline, right? And, having discipline does not mean that motivation is completely useless, right? These two actually go together. They go hand in hand. So motivation is the feeling of wanting to do something, right? That's either productive or unproductive. It's the desire or the feeling of wanting to do something, wanting to put an action towards something, right? Discipline, however, is the act of doing something in absence of motivation. So discipline is the act of doing something you don't feel like doing, right? Whereas motivation is the feeling of wanting to do something. So with that being said, these two don't go against each other. They're just both elements that are required for proper productivity, right? We want to feel motivated towards our goals. We want to feel motivated towards the work that would achieve our goals, but we need discipline in order to apply the amount of effort over a consistent enough period of time to see whatever results we're actually looking for. And the key with this video is actually that motivation is created by discipline. The feeling of motivation comes from having discipline, from doing the work, from putting in the effort and working through those resistance barriers, meaning discipline is actually required to feel properly motivated in the first place. So why exactly does work increase motivation? Why do I say that work increases motivation? This is because when we are engaged in effort, we are actually increasing our healthy dopamine. When we are engaged in things that are overstimulating, like scrolling on social media, watching porn, smoking weed, drinking alcohol, things like this, when we are engaged in these overstimulating activities, what's happening is basically our dopamine is getting a spike, which our brain responds by desensitizing itself to dopamine and downregulating dopamine, or at least our baseline of dopamine. So after the fact, we actually have less dopamine and therefore less motivation, because dopamine is the neurotransmitter that drives us towards taking action to achieve something that we want, right? So it is essentially the neurotransmitter that follows through on what we are motivated towards, right? So if we are motivated to achieve a goal in business and we desire to achieve a goal in business, typically this is dopamine at play. The feeling of motivation is dopamine at play. So, and the dopamine is actually what gives us the energy required to achieve the goal, which is why motivation is actually good and healthy. So when we work, we are actually increasing our baseline of healthy dopamine and our sensitivity to that dopamine, meaning we will feel it more intensely, more prominently. And if dopamine as a neurotransmitter is driving us to feel motivated towards achieving our goals, then we are going to increase this feeling of motivation. Now, another key point here to understand when it comes to motivation is that you can't feel motivated without momentum. So momentum is essentially the energy or the drive behind your desire to achieve a goal actually actively moving itself into the direction you want to go. So once you have momentum, things are moving in that direction. And when there is movement, there is flow, right? It becomes easier to apply effort in that direction, and the easier it becomes and the more flow you can achieve with it, the more motivated you will feel. But when you don't have momentum in the beginning, right, it's impossible to feel motivated because in the beginning, To build that momentum requires you push through a feeling of resistance. And that feeling of resistance is the opposite of motivation, right? It is this feeling of being pushed back against, right? And so we can't feel this motivation in full because we are currently working through our own resistance to the beginning stages of whatever it is we are trying to achieve. But then once we start to actually get that momentum, right? Once we start to get movement in that direction, the feeling of desire and motivation for continuing that trajectory increases. Building momentum through discipline. So the best way to actually build momentum is through these disciplined actions, right? So every time we stay disciplined to our goals, right? We take actions towards whatever we want to achieve, or we reduce actions that stop us from getting there, right? This is an act of discipline. When we continuously and consistently apply these acts of discipline, we start to build momentum in that specific direction. And this is how discipline actually creates the feeling of motivation. And so the more disciplined we are, the more momentum we build and the more motivated we feel. And this is why it's a paradox, right? You don't get motivation in the beginning stages. Motivation, although it is the feeling of desiring to move in the direction of your goals, isn't the thing that initiates progress towards those goals, right? It is something that essentially builds as you go, right? Momentum increases the more you apply discipline, and discipline is required to achieve whatever you want to achieve, because discipline is the act of doing something in absence of motivation. And when you do something difficult or effortful in absence of motivation, you increase your dopamine levels. And when you increase these dopamine levels, you feel more motivation, right? So again, that's why it's a paradox, right? Because you do not feel motivation in the beginning. Motivation is not the thing that initiates change, right? It is the effect of it. And it actually comes as a result of taking action in the right direction in absence of feeling that motivation in the beginning. And so when we start to apply discipline, this is how we actually end up getting more motivation as a result of it, is because when we apply discipline, we see the progress. And the more we see the progress, the more we want to progress. And this is a natural byproduct, right? The more progress we make, the more we prove to ourselves that we're capable of doing the work, even when it may be difficult, the more motivated we're going to feel to continuously move in that direction, because it feels good. It feels good to accomplish things. It feels good to grow and progress. And so the more we feel that and the more we experience that, the more likely we are going to be to want to go and pursue it again, or further rather. So this is why when we do apply this discipline, when we are consistent, when we are progressing, then we start to feel more motivated. But we can't rely on the motivation to be our reason for doing these things. But that is all I have for this video. I do hope you guys did enjoy it. I hope it was valuable. And if you want to see more content like this, you can subscribe to the channel. But that is all from me, and I'm out of here. Peace.